are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai, and I'm really delighted to welcome to the show Jeff Burton. He is a political and government affairs strategist, the former deputy executive director of the National Republican Congressional Committee, and former senior staffer for then House Republican Whip Eric Cantor. Jeff, welcome to A More Perfect Union.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be on. Great to meet you.
Oh, great to meet you, and thank you for being here. Jeff, let's set the table. Rand Paul just released 1,141 pages of this document over the weekend of what he says are Anthony Fauci's near daily diary entries from the pandemic, right ahead of a Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing this past Wednesday, where Senator Paul subpoenaed Fauci as a part of the committee's investigation into the origins of COVID. Jeff, from a pure political strategy lens, why release this now, just days before the hearing, instead of using it live in the room?
I don't think it's really about politics. You know, when you look at Rand Paul, he runs, there's three parties in Congress. There's Republicans, Democrats, and there's Rand Paul. And Thomas Massey and folks like that. And I could say there's a lot more in that respect. But, you know, to get inside the head of Rand Paul and why he's doing something, it's hard to explain. But as far as what I can tell you is that there's still questions about the origin of COVID. There's still questions about the motivations and some of the money that Anthony Fauci has made, both when he was in office and beyond. And I think those are valid questions. And whether the origins of this diary, where that came from, I think is important. And I think all should be laid bare, and hopefully will be in this hearing, as to what's really happened, because I think there's a lot of those questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, but questions from whom, right? I mean, I think there are a lot of people who have sort of moved on. This is something that has been investigated, the origins of COVID. We know that there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there around the origins of COVID. Why is this still not settled? You know, what's the political juice that folks in office or folks aspiring to hold office are still able to squeeze out of any doubts that might be out there in terms of the origins of the COVID pandemic?
I think part of it comes by trust, and I think it's a lack of trust in our political institutions. You see that in elections, you see that in government up and down, whether it's state legislatures, city councils, or Congress. And I think with COVID, it was such a huge impact. It was so misunderstood and somewhat misdiagnosed at the start. And there's reasons for that, I'm sure, but I don't think that there's been a lot of clarity around that. And whereas for most people, they're able to move on and say, okay, it was something that happened, and now we can either make the most of it or we can dwell on it. I think there's still a lot of people dwelling on it, and think about people who lost family members because of COVID, and or people whose businesses were ruined because of COVID. You can look at the toll that it's taken on government with the spending that had to happen and the complete and total shutdown. You look at international relations, and it was such a defining moment. And then you look at our kids. You know, I live in California, and the schools were basically shut down for a year and a half in integral times. Imagine a 7th, 8th grader. You know, my stepson was in 7th grade. He was ripped away from all his friends and then said, okay, go back. But after a year plus, but you have to wear a mask for a year and a half in your classes. And it harmed the development of our children and our future. So I think all information still needs to come out. And I'm not sure that it all has yet. And that's, I think that I'm not talking about the motivation, but I'm talking about where I know a lot of people are.
Well, so Jeff, in one entry, we know that Fauci recounts clashing with Senator Paul directly, writing, quotes, "I finished by looking him in the eye and telling him that if anybody is lying here, it is he," end quote. How much of this is genuine oversight? I mean, you talk about, you know, the challenges that a lot of institutions are having, including but not limited to our government, when it comes to trust from the people. You know, how much of this is genuine oversight, and how much is a decades-long personal grudge match playing out through subpoena power?
Well, Anthony Fauci is certainly not the only person who has a personal grudge match with Rand Paul. You can see, current Secretary of DHS, Mark Wayne Mullen, and that, made for TV drama with the hearing, and, they genuinely hate each other. So it's Anthony Fauci isn't new in that, but that's why it's a public hearing. That's why, there's committee members of both sides on the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, who'll be able to question, and there'll be people there who can defend him and people there who can get their questions answered. I think this hearing is going to be a whole lot more than just the Rand Paul and the Fauci show, or at least I would hope so, because that doesn't really benefit anybody, per your point.
I mean, and there are a lot of people out there that see it as Senator Paul having a grudge with Dr. Fauci. You just mentioned Dr. Fauci potentially having a grudge with Rand Paul. But for our listeners who lived through the lockdowns that you were just describing, lockdowns that even, your stepkids shaped their educational experience. People live through these lockdowns, these school closures, losing loved ones. I always like to remind people we lost over 1 million of our fellow Americans to the pandemic, and we don't memorialize that enough, in my opinion. But why does this origins fight, why does it keep resurfacing years later instead of the country focusing on pandemic preparedness going forward?
Well, I think they're connected, and until you have the answers on the past one, I think it's hard to plan for the future. And one of the things that I'm most worried about is, okay, so yes, absolutely, it was a tragedy, and so many people died, but there were so many people whose lives, who weren't necessarily at risk, who shut down everything was shut down. And what I worry about is when the one that's going to kill 1 billion people, and everybody's, oh yeah, you did that already, you shut us down, we don't believe you anymore. And I think that's the reason why all this needs to come out, so that there can be steps in advance of the next pandemic, which we know will come at some point, and it'll probably be a lot worse than COVID. Not to minimize anybody's loss or what happened, but we got a little bit lucky there too, based on this. And I think you have to have the answers of the past in order to plan for the future. So I think they're interconnected, and I hope that this isn't just a gotcha show, and that Mr. Fauci, who played a huge role in the vaccine and everything else that came to be, that he has some good answers for where he was, because I don't think, and his decisions in that process, because I think there are a lot of questions that people have, and this isn't necessarily a thing for politics. It's not going to affect the upcoming midterm elections. It's not going to determine who controls Congress. It's more of a niche issue right now, but it's something that is important.
What's not going to determine
the origins of COVID, or this hearing with Fauci? It's not going to play a role in the upcoming elections in November. So to say it's purely political, there's not going to be some gotcha expose. That's I think the American people, per your point, are a lot more interested in other issues that are going on, and what you were talking about before, and where the money's going, and the economy, gas prices, wars overseas, all that, than the past. But I think looking ahead to the future, something like this, and really getting the answers to the questions that some people do have, is important, planning ahead.
Well, the origins of COVID, that may not be on anybody's, top 5 list. It may not be on anybody's bingo card, considering the issues that everyday American people are grappling with. But who can they trust? That is something that is on the minds of voters. And Jeff, there's another layer to this story, because Fauci apparently didn't hold back on Trump either. USA Today's headline alone tells us where this is going. It reads, "Fauci lets loose on what he calls Trump's infinite lying." Does a private diary criticizing Trump's messaging, released in this political climate, does it change how Republicans on that committee treat Fauci on Wednesday, or does it just confirm what everybody already assumes?
Almost every member on that committee has met with Fauci. They dealt with them. There's not a lot of new folks that are new to this. Yes, they come in with their own opinions and such, but I think they know Anthony Fauci, and they've worked with him in the past. And I think that experience will be more than just this diary. And I do think that this hearing will be a lot more than just the origins of COVID. It's the process of decision making throughout that process. And ultimately, I hope rather than a big gotcha, the committee and the rest of the government uses it to prepare for the next pandemic, like you said, and be better off in the future rather than just trying to get political gotcha moments, which will certainly happen, but hopefully there's less of that and more serious discussion.
When we come forward, speaking of serious discussion, I want to ask you, if you were advising a member on that committee, what's the one question that you tell them to ask Fauci that nobody has asked Fauci yet? We're going to get your answer to that and more when we come forward. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. We are live from the Bay Area with Jeff Burton. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai, and really delighted to be in conversation with Jeff Burton. Jeff, I think this is your first time on A More Perfect Union, right?
It is. I'm glad to be here.
Well, welcome to your inaugural experience here on A More Perfect Union, the only Black-owned and operated talk station west of Mississippi, KBLA. We are happy to have you. Our leaders.
I live in LA too, so I was enjoying the Dodgers commercials.
Oh, wonderful! That's good. That's good. Our leaders, learners, and listeners should know that you are the former Deputy Executive Director of the National Republican Congressional Committee and former senior staffer to then House Republican Whip Eric Cantor. And before the break, we were talking about Fauci's diary and how things are whipping up on these internet streets about what's in that diary. We know that there's a hearing that is coming up. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to share, what would you advise members of that committee, both Republican and Democrat? What's the one question that you tell them to ask Fauci that nobody's asked yet?
I actually have two, and they're not political. And I think they could be for Republican or Democrat, because I think getting beyond the politics is important here, like we were talking about before the break. First one would be, what, and I think this could be, like I said, either one of these could be either parties, and it would be, what did Washington learn from you that maybe it shouldn't have, and what should have Washington learned from you that it didn't? So trying to really get that introspection from him. He was on the front line, and had no one living had experienced anything like this before, and let alone with the government. Our government has grown so much, but I think both parties. What did we learn wrong from your actions, and what should we have taken away that we didn't?
Wow. I mean, I would be fascinated to see the president answer those exact questions on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, because I don't know about you, but every time I think about those early days of the COVID pandemic, I wasn't in the White House briefing room at the time. But I remember watching the briefings, and the one briefing where, the president said, drink bleach. You could see Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci, sort of recoil. You could see,
I think everybody
some of the public health people recoil. Are there still any Republicans out there that hear that and recoil? Because I think sometimes folks on the left, folks left of your standard bearers in the Republican Party, just kind of scratch their heads and wonder sometimes, are we hearing the same thing?
Yeah, and I think both parties are so far apart right now that I can say the same thing about a lot of things that Trump will say, President Trump, or the Republicans, or the Democratic Socialists and such. I'm just like, what? So I think there's a big disconnect on that, but I don't know that you'd get the same answer, or the depth of answer that maybe we'd get out of Mr. Fauci. At least what I would hope for. If it was asked on the other way.
That is a part of the challenge that we are all living in this moment. Moving along, I'm sure Democrats are making the case that now is the time to tackle anti-corruption reforms, framing it as a check on President Trump and an overhaul of a system that voters see as co-opted against their interest. In fact, Congressman Robert Garcia, representing the people of Long Beach and the South Bay, who chair the House Oversight in a Democratic majority, he said his team already has dedicated groups working on Epstein, working on Trump's family corruption, working on Department of Homeland Security and ICE, calling those teams, quotes, actively working on preparation, letters, and research. Jeff, as someone who's worked the inside of a congressional majority, is this the kind of pre-majority investigative groundwork? Is this normal, or is this more aggressive than what you saw at the NRCC?
No, it's absolutely a normal. The minority's number one job is to win the majority, and that's what everybody focuses on from the day the past election 2 years earlier. So I think that this is totally normal. Republicans did the same thing in 2021 or 2021 and 2022 when Democrats controlled all three branches under Joe Biden, and you saw those investigations and things that we're working on coming out. Whether there's smoke and there's fire, no one really knows, but I believe in oversight, and either way there should be a little bit more oversight of both parties, how we do that, because there's no such thing as a independent commission these days. Everything is skewed one way or another. So I'm sure any wrongdoing is going to come out regardless. It's just whether it's by Congress or the judicial branch or wherever it may be.
I'm sure you're following how Congressman Jamie Raskin, how he's called the financial and political corruption around this presidency, quotes, a civic emergency, and said that Congress has a responsibility to expose it and crush it as quickly as possible. Is that the language of oversight, or is that the language of a party that's already decided the outcome before the investigation even starts?
And thank you for saying that, because that's exactly where I was going to go. I mean, when you make those comments, it's as a judge and jury, you can come up with and prosecutor, you can come up with any argument that you want. They're doing it already without all the facts, and I don't think either party should really do that. So I don't know that. And the problem for the American people, there's already such little trust in our institutions. You go back to our healthcare discussions about Fauci. The other question I'd ask is, regardless of COVID or blame, not placing any blame, but confidence in our public institutions, health institutions, is lower than it's ever been. And that's from both parties. You can say the same thing about Congress and any presidency. And when you go in and you're playing partisan politics as much as both parties do right now, the public isn't going to trust it. And I think that maybe they're going after the wrong thing and already making sure that they have this decision, instead of really having an open, real investigation into what is going on. And then if the president, no matter which party, has nothing to hide, then there shouldn't be a problem. But it's going to be any decision that Jamie Raskin or Robert Garcia or that they come up with, it's going to be immediately dismissed by 50% of the public. So it's not going to mean anything. And the only people that are really going to care at the end of the day have their jerseys on already, and middle of the road voters get left in the dust.
But Jeff, do you think that it should mean something? I mean, yes, there are folks who benefit from sowing seeds of division, sowing seeds of distrust, and especially with the advent of AI technology and this era of deep fakes that we are currently experiencing, chances are we're going to see a lot more of that. But I just want to put this question to you, as somebody who has like real credibility on Capitol Hill during a different time. Should this be the case? Should folks in positions of power, influence, and authority shouldn't they be doing more to just follow the facts as opposed to score political points? I mean, we all have to live together. And, if we're living in communities where we got to look over our shoulder, or where we can't even trust the public health information that we're getting from officials, that doesn't mean anything good for anyone on any part of the political spectrum, no?
It doesn't, but that's the state of our being. I grew up in an era where it was the nightly news was your main source, and it was if it bleeds, it leads, and it wasn't until September 11th Fox News and CNN were around, but it wasn't until really September 11th that the 24-hour news cycle began, and it's just gotten worse and worse on both parties. That it's gotcha politics, and it's the American people now have a attention span of a nanosecond. So you got to go as far to the left and far to the right to gain attention. But I'll tell you, I mean, 90% of the people in Congress of both parties are amazing human beings. There's a lot of work being done behind the scenes. Most of the legislation that passes is bipartisan. You hear about the shutdowns, you hear about the big ticket items and disagreements, but there's a lot of work that's gone on. You look at this housing bill, you look at crypto bill, they're working behind the scenes. Ultimately, the appropriations process will get worked out bipartisan. And so there's a lot of good people there. But, with the 24-hour news cycle and all those news stations, there's not this political discourse. There's not the conversation that you and I are having, and can have a deeper conversation on issues and not just disagree or agree, but come to an agreement for what's best. And that's what the nightly news, what the news channels and Twitter or X and Instagram and Snapchat, they just award the big soundbite, and then that awards money, and money drives politics and re-election. So that's what you see. So that really makes that discourse and for the greater good a lot harder to see.
But I've got to ask, because and thank you for joining us here. There are invitations that we extend to people across the political spectrum, and folks don't always take us up on our invitation, and so we're glad that you did. And I really just want to take advantage of this opportunity to tap into the insights of somebody like you who has been a Republican. You worked on Capitol Hill, particularly during a different era of the Republican Party. And you've seen a lot, both inside and outside the halls of government. And I'm just wondering, how are you assessing? What letter grade would you give to Republicans in charge right now? Because right now, Republicans control the White House, they control the Senate, and they control the House of Representatives. So far, the big so-called big beautiful bill, that seems to be the biggest legislative achievement of this Congress. Do you think Republicans, have done their best by the American people with the power that they've been given? How would you grade them?
I think there's two different issues here. There's what President Trump has done on the non-legislative front, and then you look at Republicans in Congress, and you say, yes, it's definitely controlling all branches of government, but Republicans right now have a 4-seat majority in Congress, which means you can lose 2 votes. And Republicans and Democrats are both very independent, and there's a couple of people who will vote no on anything. And like I said, you look at the far left and the far right who just wants the soundbite, and people are now using that with their votes. So I'd say that Republicans, I'd grade them about a B minus right now. I think the long-term benefits of the big beautiful bill, because it was more than just taxes, cutting taxes, and it wasn't just cutting taxes, it was preventing the largest tax increase in history that would have happened, that unfortunately couldn't be bipartisan because Democrats weren't going to work on that. And then looking ahead, that increased defense spending, which is vital. Talk about the Golden Dome, you talk about innovation and opening up that to not just the 5 biggest companies in the country, but to startups. I have clients now that you could have the right idea, whether it's counter drone or AI or using technology, and you take 6 to 10 years to get a contract with the Department of Defense, and now it can be 3 months if you have the right idea and the right product. And that's a real change in government. You look at this housing bill that was just passed. You look at some of the government loans for startups that have gone out, and I would say, B minus. It might be a little bit generous, but I would say that given if you look deeper in the dynamics and you look at the appropriation side right now, our government isn't, even if one side controls all three branches, well, not judiciary, but House, Senate, and presidency, it doesn't mean that you control much, because you still need 60 votes in the Senate, which means you need 7+ Democrats on every single thing. In the House, 218. There's 219 Republicans in the House, and right now, because of vacancies, there's 212 Democrats. So you lose more than 2 votes, you're not passing anything. So right now, especially this year, everything has become so political, and Democrats aren't wanting to vote on much of anything, even when it's brought to them, whether it's appropriations or something else.
Well, all I will say is, Joe Biden, had a close margin in Congress as well, and was able to get a lot more done legislatively. But I also want to just correct the record, because the so-called big beautiful bill, for people in Los Angeles, where we primarily live, people of Los Angeles County had to pass Measure ER to continue to fund community health centers, because they got a huge cut due to the so-called big beautiful bill. And so that's just LA County. We haven't looked at other municipalities and states across the country, the long-term impact there. We're going to have you back to unpack that.
If I could answer that just real quick, and hopefully another conversation, we can have actual numbers. What I'd like to look at on that cut that you talked about is the rate of growth that happened was unnatural because of COVID. And there's a lot, you talked about transportation funds earlier. There's a lot that was given out through those COVID funds under President Trump and President Biden, that had to be reined in just for sustainability. And if you look at that cut, compare the cut of where it is, where the funding is. And I'm not saying it on every single thing, but I'm saying let's look at where the funding is now versus where it was in 2020 pre-COVID. And let's compare those numbers and see what that rate of growth is, because all those things and those giveaways to the states went so high during COVID. Jeff,
we're having such a good conversation. I want to keep you around just a little while longer. We're going to take a commercial break. More when we come forward with Jeff Burton, our Republican strategist, is joining us, and we're talking shop. We're keeping it real. You're listening to A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580.